Yeah, I think there's 2 power strips per row.
That'll work.
So, yeah. Okay, John?
Now I want to get to the end, so I may go a little quickly through the first bit because I don't really know how much time we need. But if we end up with a little bit more time tomorrow, that's okay because we can circle around and cover some stuff as well. So don't panic. This is the nature of these training sessions, if you haven't been to one before, is kind of dynamic. If you've got a question, you put your hand up. As we saw earlier, I'll give you the microphone and you ask your question. Sometimes I'll respond and say, well, we're going to cover that a little bit later on. You might have a question in your mind that we're going to cover, and I'll let you know. If I don't cover it, then ask it again, especially if I get there and it sounds like I was covering it, but I didn't answer your question, ask again. But other than that, asking questions is a good thing because there's no stupid questions, right? Only stupid people. So go ahead and ask the questions. Otherwise, you'll sit there and get lost. There are some ground rules for what we're going to do. As I was preparing this, I had quite an ambitious kind of app in mind. Have a mobile app here for the CIDC, and you should have got an email this morning about how to get that mobile app, how to log into it, and so on. If you didn't, do check your spam filter, and if it's not there, then come see me at some point during the day, and I'll dig it out. I've got copies. I realized as I was developing the training that it's actually quite an ambitious project. So normally with training, I would have like a little example of this technique and a little example of that technique and so on. But with this, it's a working program. You actually have to cover all the corners. You can't have that kind of traditional, oh, it's just an example, we don't have to worry about this and this and this and this and this. We have to cover all the corners. So we're going to see how it goes. We're going to see how it goes. I am, of course, cheating. I hope you understand that. We can't possibly build a system like this in 2 days. All right? I mean, you can build chunks of it inside 2 days, but I can't explain it and build it at the same time inside 2 days. So I have to start somewhere. I'm starting with a dictionary. My dictionary is well formed. It's got all the fields that I need. It's kind of, having built the thing, I now turn around and say, hey, I've got the dictionary to start with. You should be so lucky. You should be so lucky as to start with a dictionary. I know many of us are going to be taking dictionaries that are in existence already. Some changes to them are unavoidable. Sometimes those dictionaries, and I speak from personal experience, are not quite what I would have hoped for. And I'm talking about my own dictionaries, all right? If I could go back 25 years and give advice to my younger self, there's some key things about the dictionary I would tell them. There would be some key things about data structures that I would tell him. Such as life. We learn. If we're not learning, then what's the point anyway? I'm going to lie today. All right? I'm going to lie for a number of reasons. One is that sometimes things don't work quite right, and I'll wave my hands and pretend like it did. All right? That's why we're called programmers. This is not the bug you're looking for. The other thing is that sometimes when we're doing training, it's very difficult. I've got a number of people in the room of different levels. So there's some folks here who've been building web servers and mobile apps for some time. I've got other guys who've never built a mobile app, or never built a server app, or never built an API app. And you can't go from 0 to 100% in one bite. It's too much. So sometimes we have to do kind of baby steps along the way. For example, when you all went to primary school, they told you the Earth was round. Am I right? Is the Earth round? No. So it's a lie. But the lie is good enough to get us going in the right direction. Okay? A little bit later in your schooling, they may have told you it's not round. It's an oblate spheroid, meaning it's been squashed down at the poles and there's the bulges a little bit at the equator. And you went, oh, okay, we're going up in the world because now we're getting some refinement. But that's also a lie. It's not actually an oblate spheroid because it's slightly big on one side and slightly small on the other side. It's actually a geoid, meaning the shape of the Earth. So there you go. Right. You want to know what other lies they told you in primary school? This is one of my favorites. Because I go all over the world, well, when I did, I don't do it so much anymore, but I go all over the world, I go to all these things, and I'd ask one question that is universally taught, as far as I can determine. In every country I've been to, they taught the same thing. And as far as I can understand, to this day, everyone remembers it, and everyone believes it to be true. Okay, some of you may have heard me tell the story before. How many senses have we got? It's not a trick question. How many senses have we got? 5. Okay? This is, I'm sure you all remember this fact from where? First year of school? 5 senses? Okay? It's completely untrue. Temperature, for example. You can sense temperature. It's not one of the 5 listed. You can sense pain. Not one of the 5 listed. And yet it's a fact that we all universally, absolutely, positively know to be true. We've known it our whole lives, and now you're all sitting there with your minds exploded. It's like if you can't rely on the fact that you've got 5 senses, what can you rely on? Okay? Greg.
Wouldn't those both be a form of touch?
Hang on, I can't hear you. Oy vey.
I said, wouldn't those both be a form of touch? Temperature is touch.
No, temperature's not touch. I can prove that to you, but we'll do that another time. I can hold a flame under your arm. It's not touching you. I promise you, pull your arm away. No, it's not. So you go stand outside a window in the sun with your back to the window, you know, and you can feel the sun on your back. What's touching you? It's different nerve endings. So medically speaking, it's different nerve endings. It's a different sense. So there's lots of them. Balance. Anyone know about balance? The fact we can stand up? Different nerve endings to make you do that. Anyway, it's a wonderful thing. So we're going to lie today. The experienced among you will be desperate to throw your hand up and say that's not true. If it is actually a lie, then do say so. Call me out on it. Because sometimes there's a misunderstanding there that does need to be cleared up. Mine or yours. I'm very happy to be corrected. But sometimes it's a nuanced version of the truth. Okay, so try and take that into mind. I'm going to try and throw out things today which do help people who've been doing this a long time. And that's going to go over the head of some of you. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. I'm going to be starting from the beginning, though, so that if you've never done an API server, you've never done a web server, we're going to start from the beginning. So you should come with us, at least some of the way. All right? And please don't expect that you're going to get to the end of the day tomorrow and go, right, now I know everything. That's just impossible. Firstly, you will have forgotten 85% of it straight up. Today is not so much about learning detail. Today is about learning concept. If you understand some concepts and you understand what can be done, okay, that's the most important thing you're going to get out of today. You can always go back and look at the detail after. Tomorrow we're going to be looking more at the mobile app itself, if the timing goes to plan. And that's a little bit more detail there. And some of that detail will go over your head. That's okay too, you can review it. But if you find yourself getting lost, just sit back, stop worrying about the details and start trying to think in terms of the concept, okay? All right? Everyone with me? Right. As I said, this is the first time out. I don't have any slides for it because, well, time. So, I'm going to be following along in my book as well. All right. Let me start with a warning. The single biggest mistake many people make, I won't say everyone, but many people, quite a few of whom are in this room today, is that start something like this. Right, I'm going to build a web app. I've heard about this NetTalk thing. I know lots of people like it. I know lots of people are using it. I've never used it. But you know what? I'm going to take this NetTalk thing and I'm going to give it a bash. I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. Give it a bash is not an expression that's a good expression here, is it? It means give it a try. Back where I come, giving it something a bash means giving it a try. I think in other countries, giving it a bash means something completely different, as I discovered in an email not so long ago. Biggest mistake you'll make. You'll start and you'll say, oh, okay, so I've got this NetTalk engine, and I can embed HTML in there. And, you know, things are a little strange to me, and I don't really know how to make this thing work, but I can embed lots of HTML. So I can go to my favorite HTML editor, and I can whip up some HTML there, and then I can come and kind of try and smush that into NetTalk, and I'm going to beat NetTalk with a stick until it does what I want. This is a common mistake, because what's happening is you're trying to jump over the learning step. You're trying to jump over, how do I make this tool do what it wants to do? No, I'm coming rather from this point of view, and I'm going to try and mold NetTalk to do what I want it to do. That can work, and a very small number, less than fingers on one hand, have pulled it off. It does take an enormous amount of work, and you have to be quite skillful. You have to really understand what you're doing when you do that, and that's not most of us, certainly not me. All right? What will happen is you'll do that for a couple of weeks, you'll get very frustrated, things will seem to be very difficult, and they are. Because you're taking what is essentially a very complex framework, and you're trying to kind of beat it into a coma and make it work over here the way you think the web works, which may not be how it works at all. There's a lot of things that happen inside a web server which make you think you've got browsers and forms and windows opening and closing, and none of that is true. That is all smoke and mirrors. All right? So there's a danger in taking your ABC experience and kind of like, oh, well, I'm going to make it work like that, because it doesn't. After about 3 or 4 weeks of this, one of two things happens. You either throw your hands up and abandon things completely, or you finally crack, you come to a user group webinar and we tell you to throw it all away and start again. Okay? That's the biggest mistake. Maybe it's a useful mistake along the learning curve. Once you're further down the track, you'll discover you actually can do that sort of thing, but you don't do it in exactly the same way. So in other words, what you'll get to is a place where you're saying, all right, I've got this big framework, I can actually leverage the framework, I can do what the framework lets me do, now I want to start customizing it. And then it becomes actually quite easy because you understand what you're customizing into. Right? So that's a big mistake. Yeah, even if you're successful, by the way, you end up with a maintenance headache, a long-term maintenance headache. So it's not even a good outcome when you are successful kind of smushing them together. I mean, don't get me wrong, you absolutely can mix static stuff and dynamic stuff. CapeSoft website is a case of that. The CIDC site that you've all seen for days and months and weeks now, right? That's a bunch of static pages mixed in with a bunch of dynamic stuff, and obviously for the backroom boys, there's a lot more dynamic stuff that happens behind the scenes. So you absolutely can mix them together. Don't make, you know, it's a web server. It'll serve anything. But be careful about the framework that you dive into. Yeah, some warning signs if you're doing it wrong. If you're writing HTML code, I would say if you write any HTML at all, other than literally tiny, tiny, tiny snippets, if you're writing any HTML at all, in the first 6 weeks to 2 months, you're probably going down the wrong path. No, that's a rule of thumb. I mean, you know, someone might pick it up quickly, fair enough. But if your first instinct is to start putting actual HTML into the strings, that's a warning sign. If you're trying to write your HTML in another tool and then plug it in, that's a warning sign. If you were on the internet recently and you saw a theme for some website that's selling themes and you took that theme and you're running with that, that's probably a sign that you're starting from the wrong place. Okay, you can go past there, but you probably don't want to start there. And if you can't find an example of what you're trying to do, chances are, not always, 50-50, let's say. Sometimes there aren't examples. Sometimes they're just, you're on the wrong track. You with me? Everyone looks very serious. Very serious. Poor Mike here is quivering. Yeah? He's blaming it on the cold. He's from, this is a Canadian and he's blaming it on the cold. I'm not convinced. All right. And you won't be alone. Lots of people have made this. There is a commitment to NetTalk. How to put this? People ask me, I've got a desktop application and I want to take it to the web. You know, will NetTalk help me do that? And this is a difficult question to answer. Because on the one hand, the short answer is no. Okay? NetTalk is not in the business of taking an ABC application and putting it on the web. There are products that do that. They have upsides and they have downsides, right? Because every choice that you make when it comes to programming, every choice you make is always a compromise. There's always an upside and a downside. And if you can't see the downside, then you probably don't understand the choice you're about to make. You can't see the compromise. You have to know what the compromise is, accept that compromise and move on from there. When I started with NetTalk, we kind of experimented a little bit, we played around a little bit, and we decided the model that we were going to take and where the strengths were going to be and where the compromises were going to be, because there's always a balance, right? The strength of NetTalk is where we create the best application you can create. Your customer will have the best experience that he can have. Okay, so we wanted a system which ultimately resulted in the quality program, not in the speed to get there. All right? So it takes more time and it takes more effort to get there, but you end with a better result. Now that particularly works for systems where you have, it's commercial, you have large numbers of customers. The opposite approach is the one that says, I've got something over here, I need to get it onto the web very quickly. The quality of the result is not as important. The speed with which I can get it there, and by speed I mean cost, right? Time and money cost. The speed with which I can get it there is the most important factor, because there's only going to be 3 people using this thing. So spending 6 months crafting it and making it fantastic is not actually economically viable. Right? So those are the 2 approaches you get with the web. You don't really get to pick something in between when it comes to desktop to web kind of movement. So with NetTalk, we wanted the best result. And that means you've got to learn it. And that takes time. So that's the commitment. All right? Unfortunately, it's not a checkbox. It can't be. Because if you make it just a checkbox, you end up with something that's not as good. Choose my words very carefully here. All right? So that's commitment. Put the time and energy in. We were talking over breakfast. It's like all programming. When you're in the moment of programming something, you start going, right? Everything's where you want it to be and so on. Then you take 3 months off and you start working on some other project. And you come back to this thing and you're thinking, how does this work again? I can't remember. And programming's like that, right? We get focused in on the zone of something. I'm building reports. And it takes, the first couple of reports are a bit slow, but then I'm in the zone and I'm just grinding reports out. Then I don't do reports for a year. And I come back and it's like, I can't remember how to do reports. Where are those settings? Yeah, that's the nature of it. We get better at it the more often we go back, the more often, the easier that kind of reacquaintance time becomes. But the reality is if you don't build servers, okay, you're not going to remember anything from this training. So my advice to you would be next week or the week after, sometime soon, build yourself a little API server. We're going to talk about API servers just now. They are easy to build. They are really easy to build. Build one. Build 2. Build something small. You can always add on to it later. Taking that first step will get you a long way going in the right direction. You may be a bit bolder than that. You may say, okay, I'm going to go away. I'm going to build a little web server application. And we're going to talk about those just now. Great. Okay? But try and start exercising that muscle. Because firstly, you'll discover it's not nearly as hard as you probably think it's going to be. Like most things in life, right? Starting is 80%. I mean, it's the programmer's thing, right? We're 80% finished, means we've started. Is that right? You told the customer I'm 80% finished? It just means that you've actually started. That's all it means. Because that's the hard part. You may have done some web apps before. You may think to yourself, I know, I'm going to build a tiny little mobile application. It doesn't have to be big and fancy. Build something little. Just try and exercise the muscle a little bit. Right, that's the preamble out of the way. I will finish with this. NetTalk's not finished. It's a cliche for when people say, I don't think it'll ever be finished. I do think it'll sometime be finished, but it's not finished yet. There's a long way to go. It works on the web, and the web is an evolving platform that moves very rapidly. Very rapidly. Things we couldn't do 5 years ago are now commonplace. Things we couldn't do 2 years ago are now available in everyone's browser. The thing moves very rapidly. So it's not finished. From a security point of view, it's an ongoing thing. This I would throw into the commitment section as well. If you're going to put up an API server, if you're going to put up a web server, it's different to putting up a desktop program. With a desktop program, you can more or less write it, give it to the customer, and leave for the next 10 years. All right? How many of us have got programs that are old that are still running? And I'm not talking about ones you're updating all the time. I'm talking about ones that you literally last compiled who knows when, and people are still using it. It's common, right? And on desktops, you get away with that. You get away with it because you're working in a very isolated environment and you're not really talking to anyone else. Okay? You're not interacting. If you're interacting with a hard drive, that's like, you know, fair enough. Some of us interact with other programs, but like we write a file to the hard drive, and that's as far as it goes. CSV export or something like that. The web is different. When you're writing a web program, you are interacting with everyone's browser, like from day one. If you're writing an API server, you've got who knows how many clients hitting that server, written in how many different languages. And that environment is very dynamic. So your program has to keep pace. Okay? It has to keep pace in two ways. One is to general standards, general data standards and so on, for transferring data. So HTML5 and JSON and XML and those kind of things. And that's all happening under the hood. That's not something you need to worry about. And the other really biggie is security. I can't stress this enough. People come to me and say, oh, no, I've got my NetTalk 4 application running. It's been running for like 12 years now. And I promise you, it is now insecure. In 2014, SSL version 3 went away. More or less overnight. Certainly many servers switched it off overnight. And TLS 1.0 is going to become obsolete in 2020, next year. Right? And once that happens, servers are going to start turning off support for it. And if your client program is only using TLS 1.0, you're going to have a problem next year. Fair warning. All right? If you're staying up to date with your NetTalks, then most of what needs to happen is actually happening for you under the hood. Okay, so NetTalk 11 comes out, supports TLS 1.3. Nobody knows, nobody cares. It's just, yeah, it just supports it. We've already had people writing to me to say, oh, my bank is insisting that I support TLS 1.3. And it's kind of like, well, if you're on NetTalk 11, it does. And if you're not, it doesn't. That's the simple truth of it. There's nothing else to do. All right, it's all done for you. Security is a thing, though. In all seriousness, and I know this is a self-serving thing, right? Hey, I'm telling you, you have to stay upgraded. I mean, that's great, isn't it? I can keep them coming. But the reality is that the world is moving, and we need that. Having servers out there that are 5 years old, 10 years old, using 10-year-old security is a bad, bad thing. When your client comes to you and says, I need you to build me a web server, you say, fine, it's going to cost you this to build it, and it's going to cost you this much per year to maintain it. And if he says, well, I'm not paying that, you say, thanks very much, and you let him go. Find someone else to do it. Because if he's not going to pay you to maintain it, in 5 years' time it's going to be vulnerable, and his data is going to leak. All right? And that'll make some little press release or some little social media or whatever, and his business will suffer, and you know who's going to be on the chop for it then? It's not going to be him. He's going to come back to you and say, why is the site insecure? And you say, because you didn't want to pay for the maintenance upgrades. Does that sound like it's going to fly? No. He's going to pin the blame on you. Seriously, don't put something on the web that you're not prepared to update. And I'm not talking about like every week or every weekend, all right? I'm saying once a year, just recompile the thing, get it up and running. Just keep it up to date. Keeping it up to date is much more simple than trying to do a leap every 5 years. Much, much simpler. You with me? I'm sorry if it's self-serving, but it's the way it is. There's nothing more dangerous than someone who says, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. It's the single most dangerous thing in programming. And I'm sorry to say it, but if you say to me, I'll put you into my little mental idiot box. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. Because the problem is, people say it's not broken. How do you know it's not broken? Right? From a security point of view, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And how would you know if it's broken or not? Right. Now I wanted to show this picture, which I didn't do a slide for, but we've got it. Yeah. So this is the, oh, I know what I've got. If I use my pointer, then the online folk can't see it. Hang on. I'll use a mouse. This is the ecosystem, if you want. Sorry, I've just had a thought. Arnold, if anyone asks in the online chat, I'll post the PDF onto the website today, perhaps first break, for the online folks to get it, because they obviously haven't got a copy. At the top, we've got our database. Could be top speed files, could be SQL files, don't know, don't care, right? A NetTalk program is a Clarion program. Clarion programs, to a large extent, don't care how the data is stored, right? If you're a MS SQL guy, go for it. If you're a Postgres guy, go for it. If you're a top speed guy, go for it. The app doesn't care. The NetTalk layer doesn't care. We don't care how you store it. I'm going to refrain from making recommendations. We're going to build an administration application, which is a web app. So in a mobile space, you must understand that building a mobile app, everyone comes to me and says, let's build a mobile app. And it's like, okay, we can build a mobile app. It's probably going to collect data. It's almost certainly going to present data to the user. So we need a backend to store that data. Right? A mobile app almost never, unless you're building like a trivial game or a to-do list or something like that, it almost never just sits on your phone. The whole point of it is to get data on and off the phone. So, and I'm going to talk about phone. So at the back end, there's an administration app in our situation where John and Arnold can do the things they need to do. We need a data synchronization application, which allows the data that's on the phone to go up to the server, to the database, and for edited data there to come down. That's like a piece of the puzzle, right? And that's what we would call an API app. Then you've got the cloud, right? And then people on their phones. And there we need to put the mobile app. And people who are going to do the admin are going to get to the admin via their browser, through the cloud, whatever. Right. Is everyone happy with this model? Any questions about this model right now? Does it make sense? We've got to build all these pieces, plug them all together. When they're all plugged together, then we've got something. We're going to build it in kind of the reverse order. So if I was building one of these for reals, I would start with a mobile app. And funny enough, when I built this app for the training, I kind of did. Start with the mobile app. But for purposes of training, starting with a mobile app relies on things that you don't know yet. Does it make sense? So we have to walk before we can run. When you're in the real world, you know how to run, you'll just run. You won't have to do the walking and crawling stage. You'll do that actually afterwards, because it makes more sense to do it afterwards. But for the purposes of training, we're going to do it backwards. We're going to do the admin side first. We're going to do the API side first, and then we're only going to build the mobile app. You with me? And that's just because it's easier to progress that path for learning. So I'm not suggesting the order you have to do it. Our goals for the next 2 days is to build that system there. Hang on. Well, the trouble is that it's online and recorded. So if you just shout it out, it doesn't go in the recording, and it just sounds like I'm answering random stuff. So it's in that.
Thank you.
Yeah, glasses of water on the table, probably not such a clever idea with this, but okay, go for it.
Steve wants to know if you could put the video camera on the slideshow.
Yes, because they can't see the... You got it? Okay.
You ready? Heads up.
Oh no, you let it drop on the floor. Did I not mention that there was... Thanks, Taz. All right, I don't know why I'm throwing it from here. It could just live in the middle somewhere. Be easier. All right, so yeah, we're going to build those pieces for the guys watching online. Those are the pieces. We've got the admins thing, we've got the data sync, we've got the mobile app. We don't have to worry about the browser. There's some very nice browsers out there. I use Firefox, Chrome mostly. If you're a die-hard Microsoft supporter, you might want to use Edge. I don't know why, but go for it. I still get people who say, oh no, we're using IE. And I say, good luck with that. No, my customer has to run IE because they've got some legacy program. Go for it. Run your legacy program in IE, but don't browse the web with it. Nothing stops you installing Chrome, right? It's not like there's some rule that says you're only allowed one browser on your machine, and it has to be from 1985. Okay? But the web apps we're going to talk about now, no, IE is not officially supported. It just isn't. Look, a lot of it will still run under IE, but if you write to me and say I'm using IE8 and it doesn't work, it's like, oh, no, there you go, it doesn't work. Not particularly interested. If you go to Microsoft and you ask them, they will beg you on bended knee, please to stop using IE. It's a danger to yourself and a danger to everyone else. And if you're in some sort of corporate environment and you have to be doing something in IE, great, use IE for that, but nothing else. That would be my suggestion. Hey, what do I know? The good news is IE market share is really small. All right, I'll read out the spec because, you know, Arnold and John came to me and said to me, hang on, we've got a specification for the mobile app, didn't you, Arnold? He said, we are the customer, we are always right, and this is what we want. Oops. You can see I'm going to beat this mic up today. And there's a little footnote at the bottom of the page that says, as with all good programming projects, half of these features don't work, and some haven't been implemented. So I would suggest that, although this is the specification, this isn't the app we're necessarily going to build, or at least not all of it. But I thought I'd run through it anyway, just to see how ambitious we were. So we want to scan someone's badge to add them as a friend. You'll notice on your badge here, there's a little QR code. So if you're running the mobile app, and you can scan that QR code, you go up to someone, you scan their QR code, it will turn them into your friend. And they have to do it back to you. This is friendship one way, right? If they want to be your friend, they have to scan you back. It's a great idea. And it works. That part actually does work. Not as helpful if you're attending online. So we actually have to have a second feature whereby you can go to a list of attendees and pick someone and add them as your friend. So scanning becomes somewhat unnecessary. But it's still a cool feature. And of course, the point of the exercise, the point of the mobile app was to demonstrate some of the features that you are going to need to do in your own applications, right? Otherwise, I would have made it simple. We want to be able to take a photo. We want to be able to tag the photo. We didn't do that. We want to be able to share the photo Sort of did that. At the moment, it's not publishing up to the site, so it'll be more like sharing after the fact. Taking the photo works reasonably well in the web app at the moment. Works very well. Works fine for Android. Works less fine for iOS for reasons I haven't completely determined. Although we should be able to update the app after the event to make it work on iOS. One of the nice things about this application was that I pushed the envelope a little bit. So we came up with ideas of features and said, oh, we want to do barcode scanning, and we want to do photos stored in blobs on the phone and synchronized to blobs on the back end. We want to do, show webcams and then take the photo out of the webcam stream. A bunch of other things. Notifications. We talked about notifications. Notifications are the idea that the app's running on your phone and your phone is off, and that notification pops up on the front screen. I've actually got that working in concept, right? So I very manually kind of got one working, but I haven't got it into NetTalk yet, so it's not in the app. We've got messages in the app. You can send messages to each other, but we don't yet have the notifications turned on. But that'll be cool when we do. All right? Notifications are a thing that you can do. You'll be able to make comments on the sessions. Cunningly, all right. For those of you did anyone get the email this morning about the app? Did anyone check their email this morning? Yes. Interesting. Interesting. All right. Interesting. It's what? You would think that might be one of those lies, you would, but it actually wasn't. No, there was a mail out this morning, so I wonder where that's gone into. The problem is I could give you the address. It's app.cidc2019.com, and you're going to see a settings button because you don't know your login and password. And it's not the same. It's not the same as your CIDC login and password. And this is one of those cases where reality and training don't mix well together. So in reality, I would have built this into the CIDC app and had one database and would all be nicely kind of synced in together. The problem with that is it doesn't make for good training because you're all going to want the app at the end of the day, right? You actually want the source code. And if I mix that all in with the CIDC app, it gets complicated. Not to mention the data structures that are there and the dictionary that's there and everything else. So they're actually two different systems. All right? And at the moment, the bridge between the systems is a little flexible. And that's why you've got a different password. Same login, probably. It's your email address is your login. You can start guessing passwords, I guess, but good luck with that. I do have a list of them. So if we don't get the email to work, then we'll make a plan. We can pick that up tomorrow anyway. I can look at that tonight and see if we can get the mail out. All right, we wanted to do alerts before a session was about to start. That didn't happen. Simply didn't happen. Why didn't it happen, you say? Well, like all good programming, did you know there are two ways to write programs? Two ways to decide the release schedule of a program. Anyone know this? This is a thing. There's basically two ways to decide when a program is going to ship. And you can pick one of them, but not both. And I bet you sell both to your customers all the time. And that's when you run into trouble. Okay? The first way you can release a program is by date, which is kind of what we're doing here, right? There's a date. My program might be fixed in 2 weeks' time. Not terribly useful. Today's date is today's date. What's going to be in the program on that date? Whatever's finished. If you want a date on which it's going to ship, I can't tell you what's going to be done. Right? The other way to release a program, perhaps the way I wouldn't usually go, is to say, I'll release it when it's finished. The problem with that is that things never finish, because while you're working, your customer is thinking, and he can think faster than you can work. All right? So it's a very dangerous way. That, in that way, leads to Duke Nukem 3D. Okay, Duke Nukem Forever, sorry. All right? 14 years between one build and the next build. Because they're just more stuff to do. There will always be more stuff to do. I prefer the date approach, and you tell the customer, sure, we can have the app working by the 23rd of September. I just have no idea what the feature set's going to be. You'll notice I do this with NetTalk releases as well. I'll tell you 3 months in advance, there's a NetTalk release on this date. And everyone will ask me, what's going to be in that release? And I always tell the people the exact same thing. I have no idea. I have a list of things to do, some of which will happen before that date, and some of which will happen after that date. And that's our model for programming. We have a release, and then we add stuff. We add stuff for the next 18 months or whatever it is. And I do builds basically one every 2 weeks. Public builds every 2 weeks. It's very dangerous to say, oh, I've decided we're going to have this feature, this feature, this feature, this feature, and we're going to release on a date. How many of us do that? And be honest, how many of us do that? How many of us find that ends well? It almost never ends well. Okay, so obviously, something like CIDC wasn't really an option. The date was fixed. Some of the features didn't make it. Welcome to programming. By CIDC 2021, I suspect a lot more of the features will be in. Although I suspect the 2 months leading up to that will be a panic of writing code as well. So, yeah, who knows? Who knows, huh? Who knows? We may not even have phones by 2021. It may not be a thing. While I'm at it, there's only a very small number of reasons to write a mobile app in the first place. The one is that people have something useful that they need to get done. And so you build the mobile app so they can use it. The other is because the marketing department came to you and said, everyone keeps asking if we've got a mobile app, and we want to be able to say yes. That's a perfectly good reason to build one. In the first case, the features matter a lot. In the second case, not so much. Because it turns out people ask the question, do you remember, I don't know how many, we used to get asked the question a lot. Can I access this data via ODBC? Anyone heard that question from a customer? Back in the day. I'm talking 10, 15 years ago. You'd sit in a meeting, and the techie would be at the table, and you'd be talking about your domain, whatever it is, payroll or accounting or whatever, and they had the IT guy in the room, and the meeting would go on for a few hours, and the IT guy had nothing to say because you weren't talking about IT, you were talking about payroll. And right at the end, they would ask him, so has anyone got any questions? Frank? And Frank would say, can I access this data via ODBC? Yeah? Anyone had that question? They are never going to access it. Never. The question is purely a marketing question. The IT guy wants a question to ask, so it looks like he was paying attention and he was useful. And the salesman wants to say yes. That's the end of that conversation. He doesn't want to explain why you're never going to use ODBC access. He doesn't explain why. He doesn't want to explain no. No is the wrong word. Yes is the right word. These days, that question boils down to, is there a mobile app? In some cases, some situations. Is there a mobile app? Yes. Are you ever going to use it? No. But hey, there is one. It's a very good reason to write one, by the way. That's why a little mobile app that does two things, you honestly, yeah, it's got it. And if they do use it and they say, it'd be great, can we have this added? Fantastic. You've got a customer who's actually using it, you can build out on it. You don't have to build big apps anymore. Huh? How many of us have got apps that are over 20 years old? App systems, over 20 years old. Okay, so we're talking 90s. Any time in the 90s you start, right, lots of us. Okay, so we think all apps are huge. We look at our desktop app with 60 app files and 2,000 procedures and 400 browsers and a dictionary with 1,200 and change tables. Right, as I just recently discovered, 1,200 tables in a dictionary. Who knew it could get that big? I didn't. And so we think, whatever we build, it's going to be huge. It's going to take a year to build this thing. The reality is we can build really tiny little apps. A, get our feet wet, get going. B, learn what does work and what doesn't work. Always a good test. And C, you can put the big marketing tick on. It says, yes, we've got a mobile app. It doesn't do anything, but we got one. I know none of you came to conference because we had a mobile app, but maybe, huh? All right. Good. Let's do an introduction to web servers. Those of you who built web servers a lot, you can probably take a light nap now, but keep one ear open. I find that even if you think you know it, sometimes you hear it again and you go, hang on, that's not what I knew to be true. What is a web server? And more importantly, what do you know about programming a desktop application that you absolutely know for sure to be true that's no longer true? Okay, I mentioned earlier that your 5 senses are not actually 5 at all. And so that's a little bit of a foundation that you've built your whole life on that's now being washed away. You're not going to be distressed when you go up to your room tonight. You're going to wonder what was it all about. What else have you been? If your Miss Smith in primary school could lie to your face like that. All right? And by the way, if you ask every primary school teacher, they know that fact twice as much as you do. But they teach it to everyone, and they believe it to be true. So if you want to freak people out at your next children's PTA meeting, you ask the teacher a simple question, how many senses have you got? If she says 5, you jump up and shout, liar. Propaganda to our children, I tell you. No, where was I? Okay, we know things to be true. The most dangerous thing is the thing you absolutely positively know to be true that is not true. Because you build your knowledge base on what you know to be true. And if it's not true, you get into real trouble later on. Okay, so there are a few things that are very different between a web application and a desktop application. With the desktop application, where are we going to have our apps today? We'll have our desktop application over here. Our desktop application, you have one exe instance running to one user. Now, of course, you might store your exe on network storage. You may run it on multiple stations loaded from that network storage, the actual exe. But even in a Citrix or terminal services type situation, one exe is running to that user. Are you with me? I mean, we know this, right? It's absolutely positively true. With a web server, it's not true. It's not true, and that is profoundly important. With a web server, you've got one exe running over here, and all of you are talking to this exe. You are all sharing the data of this exe. By data, I mean variables, global variables, whatever. You're all sharing the same data. This thing over here, let's call it Notepad. If I start writing in Notepad, it doesn't appear on Mike's monitor, even if he's running my Notepad at the same time, because this exe is local to me. The data for this exe is local to me completely. The data in this program does not leak over to Mike's program over there. In the web server, we're all sharing the same data. This is profoundly important. It means we do not have global variables. Okay? And that's the first lie of the week, because we do, but they are shared to all the users. So forget them. Right? They are of very limited value, very limited. We don't have global variables. If you edit a global variable in the web server, I do something and I set a global value, Mike got that value, Merle got that value, everyone got that value. Okay? So it's not helpful. If 2 microseconds later Dries set that value, my value would be gone. It's not helpful. No global variables. Happy? Yay, no global variables, yay. We also have a disconnected model. Over here on our desktop application, you go to the menu and you open Browse Customers and a screen opens. That screen is inside the Browse Customers procedure. We're happy with this, right? That Browse Customers procedure carries on running. It sits there, it's like running, doing all the events. He's moving his mouse, he's clicking buttons, he's typing on the fields. Oh, he clicked on Save. No, it's a browse. He clicked on Insert. All right, we'll pause that browse procedure over there. We'll jump over to the form. Form procedure opens. Browser's still there. It's just kind of sitting there, not doing anything, stuck. The form opens. Processes events, type stuff, write away to this, read something to this, take a photo, clicks on Save. This thing closes. The lifespan of this form, he lived the whole time he was visible. The whole time the person was looking at it, the form was live. Yay! It jumps back to the browse. Where does it carry on from? Exactly where it was. The browse is alive, still keeps going. Okay? We know this, it's just the way things work. On the web, nothing like that. Nothing like that. On the web, you have a browser. Let's call him Edge. He says to the server, let's put the server in the middle. He says to the server, yo, send me the browse customers. The server goes, heh, wakes up with the request, sends back the response, here it is, and ends. The browse is not alive. There is no browse procedure, as you know it. At best, we can think of it as a browse event handler here. But it's not alive. It's gone. It's vanished. This guy is now looking in his browser and he's looking at the browse customers. And he spends eons, perhaps 3-4 seconds, looking at it. Okay? That computer's moved on. He's doing something completely different. This guy looks at it for a number of seconds and eventually gets around to pressing the next button. Cool, that's a request. A request rushes over to the server and says, give me the next page. And the server's like, next page of what? Right? Don't know what you're talking about. There's underlying the magic, right? That's all handled for you. It appears like the browser is still running. It appears like the next page arrived, but that's not what happened. What happened was the server woke up. Where was he? Oh, he was on browse customers. He was around about here. Okay, I'll send back the next page, and then I'll forget about it. You're now looking at the next page in the browser. Okay? The procedure over there in the server does not live. He's gone. This means we do not have local variables. Because a local variable would last about that long. Because that's about how long the procedure lasts for, about a tenth of a second, roughly. Yeah, it's completely dependent on so many things, but think of it as about a tenth of a second. That's how long it lasts for. People say, I set local variables, and then you click the next button, and the local variables weren't set anymore. Well, yeah, they don't exist. We do use local variables in the sense that we use them as placeholders. We use them as like, they make sense when you're programming, you put them in your data pad, you put them on your screen, but we're not actually using them as local variables. We're just using them as names, as placeholders. Okay? So you say to me, Bruce, that's fantastic. We have no global variables, we have no local variables. How does it work? I'm glad you asked. So all those hands rush up. Glad you asked. We have, anyone? Session variables. Now the good news about session variables is they're global to a user. Okay? Global to a user. Little footnote for those who can. We also have session variables that are global to all users. Call them host variables. which means that Jack can set one and Mike can read it. And if you think that's cool, then you realize that Jack can set it and Mike can read it in real time through some other magic which we probably won't talk about today, called WebSockets. But essentially, Jack can set a variable that Mike is watching, and Mike will get the update as Jack sets it. So if you wanted to implement a chat app through a website, it's actually quite easy to do. Session variables are set using a method called setSessionValue, or because I'm lazy, a shortened form of it called SSV. As you get going, I usually tell people when they're learning, use setSessionValue, because it's helpful to actually spell out those words, read those words, see them in code and so on. Once you're proficient and you understand it, then start using the abbreviation SSV. It's just less to type, really. To get the value, any thoughts what we might use to get the value? Get session value. Okay, it's not rocket science. Get session value gets you back the value that was in the session variable. Session variables have no type and they have no length. So you can store a string of any size you like in there, you can store a number in there, you can store anything you like. There's nothing you need to kind of deal with on that front. The nice thing about session values is that they're global to the user and they last as long as the user's session lasts. Oh, what's a session? A session is a user who's using the app. If he stops using the app for a period of time that you determine, 15 minutes by default, then the session is automatically cleaned up, thrown away, and deleted. Okay? You may have an app where a 15-minute session is perfectly okay. For example, on the CIDC website. If you're on the CIDC website, you log in, you go for 15 minutes, you don't do anything, it'll log you out. Okay? Some other apps, I've got session values, session timeouts that run 24 hours. So once you've logged in, the session lives for 24 hours. So if you come back tomorrow and carry on working, you're still logged in. And sessions and logins are technically two different things. You always have a session, you may or may not be logged in. The session remains. And the two are not really related. And what the server is doing is it's storing all your session values for you. So that when you click the next button on the browser, it comes back and says, what were you doing? It actually does a little bit of lookup under the hood, looks inside some session data, it knows what you were doing, where you were at, what you were looking at, and everything else. Make sense? Session values. We'll talk about filters, but session values come into play in filters. We use session values in filters. Quick word about another thing called values. There's such a thing where you set value and get value. They're different. They're used to pass parameters between procedures running on the same thread. Don't get confused by those. We'll talk about them maybe later, but session values is the one that you want to get in the head. When you're on a form and you're setting, I've tweaked this checkbox, I need to assign a value to that thing, you set the session value of that thing, not the variable. Variable doesn't mean anything. Make sense? There's some exceptions to the rule. Like right before you save a record on a form you're validating, you can actually validate the field. You don't validate the session field, you validate the field. Because it's loaded the record buffer and it's about to write it to disk, basically. That's one big exception. There are a few others. If you're in a browse and you're doing a calculated field in a browse, you actually can use the record because it's generating the row, so the record is live. But those are probably the two most common exceptions to the rule. Most of the rest of the time you'll use session values. Oh, where did we get to? Right, so multiple users to one exe, disconnected request response model, sessions and session values, and a quick word about browsers. Who's all used a browser? Chrome, Firefox, Edge, anyone? Anyone used a browser? This is a test to see who's listening, by the way, so, okay. Browsers have three languages that they use. One is HTML, one is CSS, One is JavaScript. The good news is, to build a web app, you're not really going to know any HTML. You don't really need to. Some of it will start to become a little bit familiar, but you'll never really write HTML. You'll read it a bit here and there. JavaScript, you'll probably stay far, far away from if you can, and that's cool. You don't need to do any JavaScript to do a web app. Every now and then you want to do something weird, and I'll give you a little bit of JavaScript to do. There's typically a one-liner. The one you are going to use a lot is CSS. The good news is CSS, by a country mile, the easiest programming language you ever saw in your life. If I do a quick whip around the room, who all programmed in DOS? Good few of us. Who programmed pre-DOS? Right. Who's going to, if I let them, tell me a story about punch cards that makes me want to punch something? Okay? You can't get 5 Clarion programmers in a room before one of them tells you about, I was using a PDP-8 and I had punch cards, and I was walking down the passage and my punch card fell out. What was it about you guys in the 60s never thought to put numbers on the stupid punch cards? 1, 2, 3, I dropped them, there. Throw them in the bin, go back, write the program again. Yeah. Anyway. Got to let it go, guys. Punch cards just age you. Just got to stop telling those punch card stories. We have all learned hard languages along the way. We've all learned new languages along the way. None of us are that old that we can't learn a new one. CSS is a language. But my word, folks, it is like just a language. Really, it's the easiest thing you will ever learn. We're going to see some CSS later. I know you're excited about that. You're like, can't wait. But it seems to me to be the thing that scares most programmers. CSS. I don't know how to do CSS. There's nothing easier to learn and there's nothing easier to use. Really. Really. I'm not saying it's like your 5-year-old could do it, but it's easiest that you will ever do. Arbra is going to be talking to us on Friday about security. Yes? Have I got, you are the one, yeah, I thought so. Security is a thing. We've come up through desktop programs and our punch cards and whatever, and security was not something we were taught. Security was not something we had to learn. Security was not something we had to worry about. We put our programs on someone's LAN, and that was the end of it. If someone hacked away at your data on that LAN, that was the customer's problem. It's on their network. Okay? It's their data. If they want to let their employees do stuff, that's on them. The only people who could even begin to hack that data would be employees or people who got access to that network. Security is just not a thing that we're worried about. It's a thing we desperately need to be worried about. For desktop software these days, for any kind of networking, if you deploy on TS+, if you deploy on Citrix or Terminal Services or RDP, if you deploy a web server, you do need to start getting familiar with some security issues. I strongly recommend you listen to Arbor on Friday. I strongly recommend you actually start thinking about some of the stuff. We're entering an era, it's not 2018 anymore, where it's okay to lose 500 million emails and credit cards and everyone just goes, hey, that sounds fine. I don't know what could go wrong there. All right? Businesses will start to fail, especially small businesses. If your competitors find out that your data leaked, trust me, they will let your customers know. Okay? Security is a thing. It's still of limited scope on the desktop, yes. But if you're building an API server, you're building a web server, it's front and center. I've talked about security already today. 90% of what you need to do is just be reasonably up to date. Not bleeding edge, just reasonably up to date. That's all. Okay? NetTalk is built to be secure by design, by which I mean the security is baked in unless you turn it off. Everything defaults to secure unless you make it less secure, and there's reasons where certain places you want to be less secure because you need to do certain things. Okay? Just like Clarion is kind of secure by design, doesn't allow for things like SQL injection and stuff like that. If you're just using drivers. If you're doing prop SQL, you've got to worry about SQL injection. You with me? Sometimes you need the power, but with great power comes panic. Right. Please, please, please. Pay attention to security. I'm not asking everyone to be security experts, but I am asking that if someone says you need to do this for security reasons, that you actually do listen. And not just go, that security thing, that's for Arbor to worry about. NetTalk applications are heavily multi-threaded. What does that mean? Glad you asked. Good question. All Clarion desktop applications are multi-threaded, yes? Most all? Any? No, no, ooh, dear my word, long breakfast. If you've got an MDI application, you've got a frame, you've got browsers, forms, that kind of thing, yeah, it's multi-threaded. But it's what I would call casually multi-threaded, in the sense that there are multiple threads, but they're all very chilled, very laid back. None of them's particularly excited. Kind of like this room. Okay. Imagine, so you're all sitting here, and you're all kind of sitting in your chair, no one's waving their arms around, no one's having to dodge someone else. It's fine. Now imagine if this room was filled with 5-year-olds, okay, and there weren't tables and chairs. It would still be multi-person, but they would be more excited. There would be a little bit more opportunity for conflict. There would perhaps be more collisions, right? There would perhaps be a little bit more going on. So in the same way, this is what an ABC desktop application looks like. There's lots of threads, but hey, right? A web application, on the other hand, is much more like kindergarten. The requests are coming in like this, and each request is launching a new thread. And that thread does what it needs to do, and it closes. Right? So it's heavily multi-thread. These threads are arriving and leaving, arriving and leaving, arriving. And so you'll see a lot on the Skype chats, people say, I'm using a NetTalk web server, and I'm discovering this isn't thread safe, or that's not thread safe, or this function doesn't work. Or as I discovered, if I tried really hard, random is not thread safe. There's a funky function that doesn't need to be thread safe. Hey? What's my point? My point is you have to kind of think a little bit differently. We are going to use all the hardware. If you've got 4 cores, 8 cores, 20 cores, whatever, those threads will all start up in different cores. So we spread the load across the CPU. The other thing is that one thread does not block the others. If you come in and ask for a report, it's not going to block all the other things that are having to happen. They're all happening over there as fast as they can. The parent comes into the kindergarten, doesn't mean the children stop working. You know, stop running around. They all keep going. So it's non-blocking. That's cool. They actually arrive into a procedure called the web server. So the web server is a procedure, as we'll see in just a minute. It's an actual procedure. It's an actual ABC procedure with a window. Yay! Something we all know and love. And he's just sitting there listening. And he's sitting there listening. He's like, yay. And a request will come in from Mike, and he'll fire it off to a thread to go do it. It's no skin off my nose. You go deal with it. And Carl will fire a thread, and you go do it. Don will fire a thread, and you go do it. I'm just the web server. I sit here and do nothing. I delegate. I get everyone else to do the work. They do whatever they need to do. So who's doing the work then? Well, there's a guy called the web handler. And he's the hero of the new thread. And he goes, hey, incoming request, I'm alive. What do I look? He looks at the request and goes, oh, it's for browse customers. Ah, browse customers, you're that guy, that procedure over there. So I'll send the request to you to deal with on the same thread. We're now on the thread, so now I can call browse customers. He'll do what he needs to do, come back to me. Yeah, that's all. I'm done. Right? So I'm alive and I'm dead, and I'm alive and I'm dead, and I'm alive and I'm dead. I'm the web handler. Right? There's only 2 procedures that really act in that way. It's like a sort of ABC-like. One thing that fools people a lot, one thing that's very different between desktop programs and web programs, In desktop programs, people can only do what you let them do. If they fire up the program, they get the menu. They don't get to fire up the program onto the browse customer screen. They get to fire the program up on the menu. They then go to the browse menu. They pick customers. They then get to see the browse customer screen. Yes? You define everything the way they can navigate about their program. I cannot bookmark the browse customer screen in your desktop application such that when I double-click the icon, it goes back to that place. Doesn't work like that, does it? In a web app, you can. You can bookmark not just which page the guy went to. You can bookmark what data he was looking at the time. Has anyone seen those links I often post when people ask about Clarion Live webinars? And I'll say, oh, you go to clarionlive.com/episode/ww !423. Anyone seen one of those links? Yes? I'm sending you a link into the program, into a browse, into a row, all in one link. So people can arrive in your web app from anywhere. It's profoundly different. Okay? So you can't say, oh, the guy was on the menu, so he clicked this menu item. So I know something. Because he may not have clicked that menu item. He may have typed the URL in. You with me? So you kind of have to think about it a little bit differently. We can't do so much work over there on the menu. We have to do a little bit more work here in the place where the guy might arrive. It's a little bit of a mindset shift. So think about that when you're doing navigation. You can't rely on the fact that the menu decides who's logged in and who's not logged in. Oh, if he's logged in, he can go to browse users. That's not good enough. That's fair enough. You should do that. Right? So the browse users doesn't appear for guys not logged in. But over here in the browse user procedure, we still have to say, you must be logged in. We can't rely on the fact that he came from the menu. It's not good enough. You with me? Important. What are we doing? Not too bad. All right. That was an introduction to web servers. Within the scope of web server, there are two different kinds of servers. Okay? We get API servers, and we get web app servers. And the two of them are serving different constituencies. Over here, we've got API servers. These are brilliant. They are so easy to write. Okay? Arnold wrote one in a webinar not 2 months ago. Okay? Or at least John wrote it for Arnold, which is much the same thing when you think about it. They are really easy to write. How many people know for a fact, no, let me not phrase it like that. How many people have heard and are reasonably sure that NetTalk is hard to use? And this is not a trick question. How many people have heard NetTalk is hard to use? Come on, come on, come on. It's absolutely true for a web app. Okay? It's absolutely true for a web app. For an API app, which is a web server, not hard. So if you're completely feet dry at the moment, and you're thinking, I need to get my feet a little bit wet. This is the guy to start with. Because he'll give you instant gratification. He's very easy to build. He's very easy to do. And here's the kicker, really useful. How many people do CSV exports or imports from the application? Any CSV export or import? All of us, right? Just curious, who's moved on and does XML and JSON as well? Good few of us, right. How many of us have got a web API that let other systems come straight into our program and go out with the data? A lesser number. But you'll be sitting in meetings and you're sitting to some guy and you're saying, oh, we need to integrate. I had a meeting with a large corporate client about 3 years ago, flew up there, no, you've got to come up to Johannesburg, fly up to Johannesburg, sit in a meeting, there's us, there's the ERP guy, there's the project manager. I mean, there must have been 10 people in the room. Where's Rob? Rob, 10 people in the room that day? And there's only 2 of us need to talk to each other. The other 8 are there to make sure that we talk for some reason. They've got lunch scheduled. The guy's like, ordered us all lunch. This is like a 10:30 meeting. We walked in at 10:30, And they laid the framework for what we were all going to talk about. And the guy said, so we need to push our data into the ERP system, and we need to get data back from the ERP system. So I said to the ERP guy, have you got a web API? He said, yes. I said, cool, we can go home now. And the guy said, but we got lunch. He was most distressed about the lunch, actually, because, but that's literally it. If he's got an API, I can talk to it. I can talk to it with NetTalk Desktop, by the way. That's another thing we're not even going to talk about today. But I can be the client to an API. I can interact with their system live using the API that they've got. That is, we are 2019 today. APIs are magnificent. And here's the thing, the secret that you may not know. Making a web API for your desktop application is easy. I would say that if you have done no NetTalk whatsoever, you can have an API up and running within 7 days. Live deployed within 7 days. Okay? If you cut back on the coffee a little bit, 3 days. Right? Once you know how to do it, once you've done one, you can churn them out very fast. We'll do one just now. You can churn them out very fast. Do not be scared of making an API. And if you want to make a giant leap, if you've got a system that's desktop only today and you say, I've got no use for the web app, I've got no use for a web server, I've got no use for a mobile app, that's fantastic, but build yourself a little API app and see whether there are systems that want to talk to you. And if you build one, the one thing you'll learn is how to talk to someone else's one. So when someone comes to you and says, they've got an API that you need to be able to talk to, 20 times easier, because you understand all the bits and pieces. There are some webinars on this topic I strongly recommend. Clarion Live webinar 300, 302, 304. It's a series of 3 webinars on building an API server. I tell everyone, if they don't know how to do it, watch those webinars, go away and do it. 3 to 7 days seems to be the norm. Absolute feet dry. It is the easiest piece of NetTalk there is. It is also astonishingly, if I may say it, powerful. Because here's the thing. When your client is a program, life is so easy. Over here, we've got web apps. The clients for whom are human. We don't need artificial intelligence. We need to get rid of the human intelligence. The plot of half a dozen sci-fi movies right there. Web apps are difficult because we're dealing with humans. And humans are picky. And humans are, dare I say it, not always the cream of the crop. Okay? There's a scale. There's a scale of users, and we have to deal with all of that scale. All right? API is really, really easy. Web apps, that's the hard part. Okay? When you heard something was hard, it was the web apps part. The rest is actually quite easy. You can tell I don't talk for a living. My word. Right. Should we actually do some stuff? What do you think? I suppose I should mention the requirements. To build an API server, you need NetTalk server. NetTalk's in 3 levels: desktop, server, apps. If you have apps, you have server, you have desktop. If you have server, you have desktop. If you have desktop, you have desktop. Okay? It's a very simple system. You would think it's a very simple system. It does confuse people. So to build an API server or a web app server, you need NetTalk server. Clues in the name. You will need X files. Well, let's cover the requirements. All NetTalks use string theory 3. Okay? NetTalk 11, string theory 3. All NetTalks use string theory. NetTalk 11, string theory 3. If you don't have string theory 3, and I know who you are, by the way. I do know who you are. Rob or Jeff or I will be out at that table all week long, and you will be walking past us. Walk of shame, I call it. Okay? You might want to correct that oversight. By the way, if you make any order this week, you get an excellent example of the full line, Cape Soft clothing store. Comes for free in various sizes. If you're building API servers, you have to have X files, and you really want J files. It's nominally optional, but optional kind of is like, do you want sprinkles on your ice cream, or do you want like something to hold your ice cream in? I mean, in theory, you could just lap it out of the tub, right? But in practice, you need a spoon. You want J files. J files does JSON, X files does XML. The world has grown up on XML, but these days, almost all APIs and almost all new APIs do JSON. With NetTalk, beyond the fact that you've got X files and J files in the application, you don't need to do any XML or any JSON. NetTalk actually does all of that for you. Okay, you're just going to write a little bit of carrying code. The rest is just magic. That's cool. All right, let's do some terminology. We have to do some terminology so that we understand what we're talking about. Oh, I hate terminology on the one hand because people hear a word and then they start to associate things with that word. All right? And it's confusing if that word now has a different meaning to what that word meant in one circumstance or another. But things have to have names. It's also helpful if you use the right names for things because then you can talk to other people. They know what the words mean. So, let's talk about a net web service method. Okay, and I might drop the net web just to simplify it. So we're going to talk about a service method. Now the danger here is that you hear method and you think, it's OOP. No. Okay, please, just let it all go. Let it all go, right? A web service method is a procedure that someone will call from outside in the world. They will pass in parameters and then we'll get back a response. It's a procedure. This is the problem with names, is that if I'd called it a web service, if I called it a web procedure, that has other connotations and its own problems, and no one knows what that is. It's a web service method. All right? You can have as many of these as you like, or as few of them as you like. You can have a program that's got 1. You can have a program that's got 1,000. It's not difficult. It's just a procedure. Like any procedure in the world, it's got input, does some smushing around, makes some output. It runs from the top to the bottom, and it's done, just like any procedure. Okay? That's what makes it so easy. If we collect them up together, and we collect a bunch of methods together, for want of a better name for the thing, it's called a net web service. Not service as in Windows service that runs under Service Manager. It's not a class, because those methods may have nothing to do with each other. They certainly don't share any data. There's certainly no properties here. It's not a class. Please don't think of it as a class. A method is a procedure that sits over there. A service is just a collection of methods, mostly really used just for documentation and interface purposes. It doesn't do a whole lot. There are some settings here at the service level which cascade down to the method level, especially around security and documentation. Okay, so we've got a method over here. You can have a service over here which is just a collection of methods. And the same method can belong in multiple services. Okay, it's not like a one-to-one kind of relationship. Obviously, this service can have many methods. Right? It's not hard, but don't read into it any more than that. A client program, it can be a browser, but is usually not a browser. A browser is a 10:30, John? We're heading for 10:30? 10. Excellent. I will finish the terminology. Ooh. I'll finish the terminology. Browser. Browsers tend to be used not for the APIs. It tends to be a client program, someone else's code talking to you. They're going to use one of 4 verbs to talk to you. Get, put, post, delete. Who's heard the term REST? A REST service or a REST client, okay? REST, by the way, simplest, easiest thing you've ever done. But it uses those 4 verbs. The ones we're most familiar with are get and post, because those are the ones your browser does a lot of. But update and delete are there as well if you need them. A NetTalk web server, by the way, is a REST server. It's also a SOAP server. It's also anything it wants to be to anyone who wants to be it. XML and JSON, we're familiar with. Data coming from the client is usually going to come as XML or JSON, or a third option which is called www form encoded. Don't panic about that. You support it, you don't care that you support it, you just do. The server, the NetTalk server, makes the client pretty much do whatever the client person wants to do. We'll support that. That's the joy of the web server. We're not actually prescribing any of this to the client. They pick and choose whatever they prefer. If they want to do XML, do XML. If they want to do JSON, do JSON. It's fine. Okay, well that is a good place to stop. When we get back from the break, and we'll have a slightly shortened break, so we'll run till 10:30. The break ends 10:30. We want to be back in the room, getting going again. We'll whiz one up. We'll have a look at a program. Does that sound good? Right. Thanks, everyone. Coffee and tea in the solutions room right behind you. Don't go far. Bathrooms are down hall to the left. Okay. Thanks very much.